All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 193, I think it is. So, today, my video on the issues that I had with the main story quest for Dawntrail blew up. At least for me it did. For a normal channel, it would be considered an abysmal failure. But I'm a small channel, and lots of people are saying stuff and commenting. So, instead of replying to each comment individually with like a page and a half of text, I thought it would be best to just answer it in a video, just to make things easier. So, the first thing, if you're new here, like the only other thing that you've seen is my MSQ video, welcome. I have no idea if you're going to stick around, because I'm kind of an annoying person. But if you do, I sincerely appreciate it. However, there is something I have to get out of the way right now. My name on all of the interwebs is Trainer Jody. And a lot of people assume that's because I like Pokemans. I do like Pokemon. It's a lot of fun. I've been playing since Pokemon Red. The first game I got when I purchased my gray brick Game Boy, to really date myself, was Pokemon Red. That is not where my name comes from. I call myself Trainer Jody because back when I could work, I was a trainer. That's what I did professionally. It's also what I did privately and still do. I do it for fun. I really, really enjoy training, developing a team, teaching new skills and things like that. It's what I am best at. I also have a degree in business management, specifically marketing management. And I have about a decade of experience in retail management and sales, and I was very, very good at it. Why does any of that matter when I'm talking about a video game? Because one of the big... I'm trying to think of the right word. One of the big kind of rebuffs to the conversation I had in that video, where I basically describe the story writers of the MSQ for Dawntrail as bad DMs that have inserted a DMPC into the game, because I relate everything to tabletop RPGs on this channel. It's what most of the people that come here, that's what they're coming here for, is my tabletop RPG stuff. One of the things that I use to kind of support that is effectively the player character is a side character in the main story quest. The main story quest is about Lamat. And the player character is really just along for the ride. And I don't think that's a very effective method of storytelling in this particular medium. If you want to create your own character that gets to solve everybody's problems, write a novel. That's what novels are for. You get to control everything. Once you start adding player input, whether it's in a video game or whether it's in a tabletop RPG or whatever, they don't want to be a side character in their own story. It's just not fun. One of the biggest rebuffs and most repeated rebuffs that I got was the idea that, no, the player character isn't a side character. The player character is either the mentor or the coach of Lamat. And so they're actually in a more important position because they are the person that is effectively training the next generation. And my experience in training, in management, and all of those things tells me one thing. If you are a mentor to Lamat, you are the worst mentor ever. And I want to kind of clarify what mentorship and what coaching is, because I think a lot of people misunderstand what mentorship is and what effective mentorship or coaching or training really is. When we talk about the idea of mentorship, a lot of people have got this kind of strange idea that a mentor is just someone that you just kind of inspires you. Like, this person was my mentor. And you've had a grand total of like 7 conversations with them in your entire life, but they mentored you because they taught you something really interesting or made you think about life. That's not what mentorship is. If you actually get into a mentorship, the purpose of your mentor is to teach you how to do the job that they do through experience. Like, that's the entire purpose of the mentorship. And it's very, very similar to the position of a coach, though there's slight differences and the things like that. But a coach has a very similar mindset. It's one of the reasons why people are using both of those terms kind of interchangeably when they're talking about the Warrior of Light in Dawntrail. They're like, oh, he's a mentor, he's a coach. Like, that's his job. He's supposed to kind of, be there when she, needs guidance. That's not what mentorship or coaching is. If you were playing, like, the game that I played, I've never been a very sports-focused person. The closest I ever got to being in shape was through martial arts, which I understand that there's sport aspects of martial arts. I did not do any of those. I just really enjoy martial arts. But I did play baseball for about 6 years. And after the 5th year, I was no longer the worst person on the team. I was not very good at baseball, but I enjoyed baseball. If you were on a baseball team and the coach only ever taught you anything when you came up to them and asked them a question, they would just give you an answer to the exact question you asked them, they would be a completely worthless coach. The idea of a coach on any team is their job is to see the bigger picture and also be able to see the things that you can't, because you are in the moment and they are outside of the moment. So they can watch you pitching or batting, and they can see things that you don't realize you're doing. Like, maybe when you're batting, every time you go to swing, you lift your front foot as you swing, and it's throwing off the balance of your swing. You probably don't even realize you're doing that. You are so focused on one of the most difficult things in sports, by the way. Hitting a baseball is unbelievably difficult. A good batting average is under 300. And when a batting average of 300 is a really good batting average. Average batting average is somewhere in the 200s. And what that means, it's a percentage. A 300 batting average is a 30%. It's 0.300. That means out of every 7 times you can hit, or every 10 times you can hit, you hit 3 of them. That's really good in baseball. It's one of the most difficult things in the world. So when you are at the plate, you are focusing on so many different things. You're like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm holding the bat correctly, and I need to make sure my muscular is correctly. Holy shit, there's a ball coming at 100 miles an hour at my face. What do I do? So a lot of times you can't focus on absolutely everything, and you will a lot of times just go into muscle memory. And some of that might be bad things that you learned, like lifting your feet at the wrong time, or not turning your hips, or not breaking your wrists when you swing the bat. All of these things are really, really important. The coach's job is to be able to watch from afar and see what it is that you're doing wrong, and then coach you. Come up and go, hey, you did this, you should be doing this. A mentor has a very similar position, though they're a little bit more hands-on. In a mentorship style situation, you're doing the job with them, but they still have that obligation to instruct you in the proper way to do things and to correct you when you do something wrong. And that's probably the biggest problem we have with the Warrior of Light as far as declaring them a mentor or a coach for Lamat. Lamat makes mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake in the MSQ. And a lot of people, again, will use that to support the idea of, oh, Lamat's a Mary Sue. We talked about that last time. She's not. Anyone that's watched this channel a lot knows that one of my firmest beliefs is failure is good. Success is the worst teacher you will ever have. Success will convince you that you're good at things that you're not. It will convince you that you're bad at things that you're actually good at. It lies constantly. Success is a horrible teacher. Failure is a fantastic teacher. It lets you know exactly what you did wrong. It will ensure that you don't think you're doing things right when you're not. Failure is a phenomenally effective method of teaching and training, and a good trainer will encourage failure, will create situations where you can fail safely. The best training environment is one where you can fail repeatedly and nothing bad happens, because you learn so much more from failure than you do success. So the issue I have is not that Lamat screws up over and over and over again. It's that if the Warrior of Light was her mentor, was her coach, the Warrior of Light never takes her aside and goes, hey, listen, this is the choice that you made. This is why it was wrong. How are we going to ensure that doesn't matter? There was no coaching. There was no correction. There was always, well, it turned out okay. There's also the kind of small issue of the Warrior of Light doesn't really provide almost any advice to Lamat. Somebody in the comments mentioned that in each one of the trials he gives a piece of, or they give, because the Warrior of Light is the player character. They can be any gender they want. But they give some bit of advice that helps Lamat learn it. That's not coaching. That's being a fortune cookie. A coach or a mentor does not just randomly give you a single piece of advice every once in a while when you're completely stuck. Are there training methodologies where you do effectively call it hands-off training, or sometimes it might be called tough love, where you basically just entirely step back and let them kind of work through the problems on themselves? Absolutely. It can be a very effective training method if it's used correctly. The idea that someone can just show up on the job and the first thing that your mentor, your coach does, or your trainer does, is just throw you to the wolves, and somehow that makes them a good trainer, is completely false. It's a fantastic way to get rid of candidates that you don't want, because you're going to frustrate them, because just because you're failing a lot does not mean you're learning a lot. And it actually takes a really, really strong-willed person and very introspective person to be able to fail on their own and still be able to learn from it intrinsically. It is a skill that can be taught. It was never taught to me, but it was something that I learned over years and years and years of failure. Mostly, like, I learned the most in sales as far as how failure works. My first job in sales was 100% commission, and I nearly starved. So the idea that the Warrior of Light is this incredibly important character because he's the mentor, he really isn't. Lamat, when in patch 6.5, I want to say, whatever the last patch of Endwalker was. I can never remember if it was 6.5 or 6.6. Anyway, Lamat does not come to the New World looking for someone to teach her how to be a leader. She comes to the New World looking for someone to help her beat a challenge. She's not looking for insight. She's not looking for knowledge. She's looking for party members. That's it. So the initial interaction with the Warrior of Light is not, hey, would you teach me how to be the Warrior of Light? It is, hey, will you work for me? That is the contract that they sign, the social contract that they sign is, hey, you are going to help me become the next ruler of this place. It was not, hey, I understand that you've saved the world so many times, and as a leader, I expect that I am going to need to save the world over and over and over again. that would be a very bizarre conversation. In fact, if you look at the leaders of every nation in the Final Fantasy XIV universe, none of them have saved the world. Ever. The only one that tends to do it on a regular basis is the Warrior of Light and the rest of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. Every so often, one of the leaders of one of the countries will help them out, like Hien during Stormblood was working with the Warrior of Light over and over again, but he was doing it to save his country, not the world. So the idea that Lamat would actively search out the Warrior of Light to teach her how to do what the Warrior of Light does best, which is save the world, doesn't make sense. She's not trying to save the world. She's trying to become the leader of her people. And the Warrior of Light has never led a country before. Hell, he's never led a free company 9 times out of 10. He is not a leader in the sense that he actually runs anything. He's a leader from the idea, or they are, a leader in the idea that they inspire other people to follow them. But the Warrior of Light would never be able to help balance a state budget. The Warrior of Light would probably have a lot of issues trying to calm squabbling senators to try and get them to work together to find a solution to a problem. Like, that's just not what the Warrior of Light does. The Warrior of Light generally has a really big sword or a shiny staff or a super cool looking weapon and then goes and destroys monsters. So the idea that Lamat is going to search out the Warrior of Light to teach her how to become a better leader for her nation doesn't make sense. The Warrior of Light is not thought of as a leader of nations. He's thought of as the savior of the world. So just from the initial interactions that they have, he's not a mentor, he's not a coach. Lamat doesn't look at him as a mentor or a coach. He is at first an employee and then more of a trusted friend, which is not a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't really do that. Then we get into actual Dawntrail, and again, there's never any sort of correction. There's barely any situation where he gives advice. I remember playing the MSQ. In the entirety of the Dawntrail MSQ, I think I was given a prompt to say something where you actually get to choose what the Warrior of Light says, maybe a dozen times, maybe 15 or 20 tops. And about a third of those times, one of the responses was ... The Warrior of Light does not interact with the story very much at all verbally. They basically are turned into a silent protagonist in this adventure, and they almost never speak. And the few times that they do speak, generally doesn't tend to be incredibly impactful. Again, people mentioned that during each one of the challenges, the Warrior of Light will offer some advice. I don't actually remember those conversations, but I have memory problems. So it's very possible. I'm not saying that these people are lying or anything like that. It's very, very possible. I simply do not remember them. But I don't remember a lot of the MSQ for Dawntrail. It was not particularly memorable. I mentioned in my video before, I completely forgot about the rainbow owlbears. It wasn't until we're dealing with stuff that happens later on and everyone has to kind of come together to do something. And the rainbow owlbears show up. And I'm like, oh yeah, we helped them. Fun fact, they weren't even my first group. You do get a choice in the very beginning. It's the only choice you get in the game, in the main story quest. You get a choice in the very beginning of the main story quest where you can choose to help the rainbow owlbears or the duck-billed short people. And the reason I call them the duck-billed short people, I don't know why, but they all wear goggles, which is totally fine, and all the goggles have like a duck bill, but the duck bill is here on their nose. They still have their mouths open like really weird Power Rangers. So I just call them the duck-billed short people because they're not Lalafels, like they're not the little chibi people, but they're all significantly shorter than everybody else in the game. So they're the duck-billed short people, and the and the rainbow owlbears. That's the only choice you get. And the rainbow owlbears were my second choice. I think it's intended that you go to them first, but for whatever reason, I just thought the other people sounded cooler, and so I went to them first. Yeah, so the idea that the Warrior of Light is some sort of mentor or some sort of coach to Wook Lamat just doesn't hold water. If they are intended to be a coach, they are written in a way, they are written by people that do not understand how mentorship or coaching works. Because from a coaching perspective, from a training perspective, they are the worst kind of coach that can exist. And coaches and quote-unquote mentors like this do exist, where they simply assume that being in their presence is somehow going to impart their wisdom to them. And in general, the only people that benefit from that are people that are already really good at whatever they're getting mentored in and simply need the chance to learn through experience. And the amount of people that are like that in the world are extremely small compared to the number of people that are capable of doing a really good job in a number of different positions if they would just get the correct training and coaching into that position instead of just being thrown to the wolves. So, yes, I don't accept the idea that the Warrior of Light isn't a side character because they're the mentor. They don't take a mentorship position. They are working for Wook Lamat, and eventually a trusted friendship forms. It's probably a little bit faster than it should have been, but they're also doing kind of death-defying things, and that creates bonds very, very quickly. So if you want to argue that, no, it wasn't fast, it's just that they were forced to grow close together because they literally had to entrust their lives with the other person. That creates bonds very, very quickly. But to try to argue that they were a mentor or something, they weren't. They offer so little advice in the entire MSQ that it would be laughable to call them any sort of trainer, coach, mentor. And one of the key aspects of a good mentor is correction. You have to correct your mentee, your trainee, the people that you are coaching. Part of training is correction. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but it is an essential part of training, because if you don't correct your trainees, then they're not going to understand. Even if they understand that what they're doing is wrong, they're not going to understand how to do it right unless they just keep doing it wrong so many times that they run out of wrong options. And that is an extremely ineffective method of training. Something that I learned when I was still a practicing instrumentalist. I played saxophone starting in the 5th grade for almost 20 years. I love saxophone. It is one of my favorite things in the world. I particularly love playing jazz saxophone and improvising and things like that. In high school, we were told the phrase, perfect practice makes perfect. Because everybody has heard the phrase, practice makes perfect, and that particular phrase is wrong. It's 100% wrong. And the example that was given to us was always this. Let's say you have a really hard section of the music. Okay, it's very, very difficult. It requires you to play at a very, very high level. And so you practice just that part. That's the hardest thing about being a musician in general, is not so much playing songs. It's playing like the same 3 measures over and over and over again. It's unbelievably boring and dull, but good musicians don't focus on songs. They focus on measures. So you have this short phrase that's really, really difficult. And so you practice it 100 times, and on the 100th time, you finally get it perfect. Guess what? You have just learned that wrong, because you have practiced it 99 times the wrong way. And the reason that you practice things is to build muscle memory, because a lot of times when you are, especially in a music situation, when you're playing, even when you have sheet music in front of you, like for a jazz band, I played second tenor, which for anyone that doesn't understand how jazz bands work, for the saxophone section, you have first, second alto, first, second tenor, and bari sax. The first alto is not a better player than the second alto, and the first tenor is not a better player than the second tenor. They play different parts, and they have different things that they focus on. Like a lot of people, like for the trumpet section, there's first, second, fourth trumpet. The first trumpet is not a better player than the second trumpet. The first trumpet tends to specialize in really, really high notes and what's called screech trumpet. That's basically where the trumpet player is just playing those really crazy high notes that makes your ears bleed a little bit. That's the first trumpet. The second trumpet tends to specialize in soloing. Like that tends to be what they do, and so they get very, very good at improvisation. I think if I remember correctly, third or fourth trumpet, I never played trumpet. I can't remember if it's third or fourth trumpet, a lot of times learned to double the flugelhorn. For second trumpet, my specialty was I was one of the main soloists for the saxophone section, and second trumpet a lot of times plays the fifths. They're basically the baritone, if you're thinking about singing parts, of the saxophone section. Extremely important notes to play because it gives color and depth to the chords. Nobody ever hears it. Nobody hears the fifth ever. They hear the tonic, they hear the third, the fifth just never gets heard, and then they hear the second tonic that's on the top, because a lot of chords they'll double the tonic with at an octave. So when you are playing, like when I was playing, I would have to be looking at the music, and in the music you have the notes themselves, you have the articulation, you have accidentals in case they wanted to change the note from the key signature, you have the key signature itself to remember, you also have the conductor, sometimes depending on the band, up there who's giving you the beat. However, in addition to the conductor, you also have to be listening to the rhythm section, because you have the person that's on the drum kit that's actually laying out all the beats, and depending on where they're putting the accents, you, especially as the saxophone section, need to be able to work in tandem with that. And because I played second tenor and was sitting right next to the bari, I also had to listen to the bass player, because the bass player is the one that was giving us the bass line, which is most of the tonic notes for all of the chords, and that was especially essential if I was soloing, because then I could hear where the chord progression was going by just listening to the bass. In addition to that, saxophones in and of themselves are their own little group, and a lot of times, especially when you start getting into like bebop and that kind of Miles Davis kind of stuff, they do a lot of stuff where they all play the same notes at the exact same time very, very fast. And you have to be able to hit the exact same notes at the exact same time with the exact same inflection that everybody else in the saxophone section is doing. And so it's simply impossible to read your music, translate the notes on a page to actual letter notes, to fingerings and articulations in time for you to be able to keep up with the band. It has to be muscle memory. And so if you practice something 100 times and you only get it right on the 100th time, you have trained your muscles to play it wrong. So the idea, bring this back to coaching, the idea of perfect practice makes perfect is none of your practice sessions count until that 100th time. Once you do it right, then you start counting, okay, I've practiced it once. We go back to coaching. Leaving your trainees, leaving your mentees to just keep throwing themselves at the problem until they run out of wrong ways to do it is a fantastic way to teach them how to do it wrong. Their muscle memory will remember all the wrong things they did, and they very rarely will remember the right thing. And if your first argument is that, well, muscle memory isn't the only thing, fun fact, your brain has the equivalent of muscle memory. When your brain creates a new pathway, when you learn something new, your brain creates that, and every time you use that pathway, it strengthens it. And your brain will always do what will always kind of use the pathways that are the easiest, the strongest, the widest. They basically take the path of least resistance. So if you learn something the wrong way, untraining your brain is not basically just saying, oh, don't do it that way. You literally have to get your brain to stop using the easiest, most obvious way that it has been taught to confront a problem, and you have to force it to create a brand new, really weak, really small pathway that it doesn't want to use. Untraining someone is so unbelievably difficult compared to just training someone the right way. It's one of the reasons why correction is such an important part of the training process. Because if you don't correct them, they're going to learn it the wrong way. And then, if they do finally figure out on their own the right way, they're going to have to struggle over and over and over again to prevent themselves from doing it the wrong way, because that's what they trained their brain to do. That's why it's so difficult to kind of get people out of habits that they've been doing for a long time. It's because that habit has a pathway in it, the brain. And it's not just like a little bike trail. This is a 8-lane superhighway that has signs and everything goes through, and you're trying to convince someone that's been driving on that 8-lane superhighway to stop using it and take this weird dirt path that goes off behind somebody's farm that you've never seen before and has like a street light every 6 miles. Nobody wants to do that. Your brain doesn't want to do that. So going back to the MSQ, the Warrior of Light is not a mentor. Again, the initial relationship that was established, the social contract that was established when Lamat first went and recruited Alice, Alphinae, and the Warrior of Light to help her, had nothing with, oh my God, you're the Warrior of Light? Why don't you teach me how to be a better leader? It was, hey, will you guys help me win this contest? She was picking teammates, not trying to find a new team captain, not trying to find a coach. She was looking for teammates. Second, when we look at the MSQ in and of itself, while yes, the Warrior of Light every so often does offer advice, it is so few and far in between that it doesn't really satisfy the role of mentor. It really kind of just satisfies the role of dude that was there and you asked him a question. And then the biggest problem with the idea that the Warrior of Light was a mentor or a coaching figure or something like that is the Warrior of Light never corrects Lamat. The Warrior of Light, if let's say that Lamat did look to the Warrior of Light as their mentor, as their trainer, as their coach, the Warrior of Light betrayed that position really, really bad by basically just kind of throwing her to the wolves and letting her figure it out for herself. Is this a training method that some people use? Yes. Can it be effective? Yes. But the thing about that training method is it has to start first with hands-on training, and the throw them to the wolves is always the absolute final step of training. You do not allow your trainee to do the job entirely on their own until you are confident that they have the skills and the knowledge to be able to do it without any prompts. And what that does, and it's an essential part of the training method, what that does is when someone is no longer holding their hand, they will find out the parts of the job that they know really well. They will find out the parts of the job that they do not know really well, that they didn't realize that they were relying far too much on their trainer, on their mentor to do for them. It's incredibly essential, but it's the last part. In this mentor relationship that people seem to think is there, they've skipped all the other parts of the training relationship to instantly go to, well, I'm just going to let you screw up over and over again, and then if you happen to ask for advice, I will give you a single fortune cookie response that you are supposed to interpret yourself. It's not how training works. That's not how mentorship works. That's not how coaching works. And again, I have met trainers like this who think that if they just do the job around people, that people will just automatically learn through osmosis or something, and they're phenomenally bad. They cause resentment amongst their trainees, because the trainees will try to figure out what they're doing, but because the trainer is not teaching them, the trainer's not explaining everything, they just get frustrated because, like, well, it looks like he's performing magic. How in the world am I supposed to? How did they just sell that service plan? Like, I've tried that exact pitch before, and I've been turned down every single time. Well, the thing that they didn't explain to you is they were using a lot of nonverbal communication to sell the training plan, or to sell the service plan. One of the things I used to do sales training on was specifically selling service plans and the like. There's a lot of nonverbal communication. Something like, what, 80-90% of a conversation is completely nonverbal. Or the information transmitted in a conversation is completely nonverbal. So much of training in and of itself, sales, management, whatever you want to do, if you're interacting with another person, so much of it is nonverbal, and understanding body language and understanding the difference that eye contact makes, and nonverbal things like nodding your head vastly change how people interact with you. Things like smiling vastly changes the interaction, and it's not a 100% one method works in one method works in every single situation. Some people prefer to talk to someone that smiles. Some people think someone that smiles when you're not friends is creepy as hell. And being able to tell the difference between people that want you to be friendly and open and smiling, and people that just want you to be very informal, or very formal and very informative, is a difficult thing to learn. So yeah, again, a few different people have said that they disagree with the Warrior of Light being a being a side characters because they were the mentor, and it's just not true. I get why people are doing this, because they do very much. I'm going to assume they actually enjoyed the story. And again, it wasn't so much that I didn't enjoy the story. I didn't feel involved in the story. This would have made a great novel. But I didn't feel like anything I did had any importance to the story. They literally could have chosen Thancred or Grahatia, who's the greatest dude ever. I love me my Grahatia. Or Ishtola, or they could have just gone all the way over to Alamigo and picked up Lise, and they would have had the exact same impact on the story that I did. Nothing. Some of the things that were really funny, the few times that you do get to make comments, a lot of times you're just talking not to Wook Lamat, you're talking to other characters, and they'll go, hey, well, what about you? There's been a couple of times where one of the answers is, I've saved the star before, or something akin to that. And people look at you like you're nuts. They go, really? And then they look over and they say, Wook Lamat is there, and Wook Lamat is not surprised. They go, I guess it must be true, because Wook Lamat wouldn't allow someone to lie like that, but wow, I guess you say the star. Like, they seemed so, like, it basically, it would be like, sitting down for like coffee with someone who introduces their new friend. Oh, hi, this is my new friend, Warrior of Light. They go, oh, really? What do you do for a living? And Warrior of Light, wearing their very cool sunglasses, just takes a small sip of their latte, and they go, I save the world every single day. You're welcome. Like, everyone would naturally assume, oh, you're an asshole. And then look at their friend and go, why are you traveling with an asshole? That's effectively how people reacted. So, yeah, like I said, it doesn't hold water. And then the other thing that kind of supports my theory that you are a side character in Wook Lamat's story, very big spoiler details here. I'm going to talk about the final trial for Dawntrail. I'm not going to go into super specifics, but I am going to be talking about the final trial. So if you want to avoid this, 100% understand, go ahead and just stop watching the video. In the final trial, if anyone is unaware of what a trial is basically like a small raid. You have 3 different kinds of group content in Final Fantasy XIV. You have dungeons, which require 4 people. You have a tank, a healer, 2 DPS. It's a dungeon. That's called a light party. A full party, you double that. 2 tanks, 2 healers, 4 DPS. And one of the 2 ways that you can be in a full party is what's called a trial. A trial is a single, is just a single boss battle that you use a full party for of 8 people. Okay, so every single expansion ends with a trial. Excuse me. Final trial. You're fighting the big baddie of Dawntrail. There's lots of things that people are so surprised. It's amazing. And the final trial in and of itself, I've got to say, boss design and combat design for Dawntrail is probably the most difficult combat design that they've done ever for Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV combat is not easy, but it's MMO combat, which is basically... don't stand in the red. Like, that is the basics of every single MMO that creates, boss encounters. The most important thing you generally have to do is don't stand in the red. Don't stand in the place where you're going to get hurt the most. Final Fantasy XIV has done a lot to make that a little bit more engaging, where they will have things like don't scan in the blinking space at a certain time, or do stand in this particular place because there's a symbol here that tells you to stand in it. So there's a lot more than that, but it's still mostly make sure you're standing in the right place when the bad stuff happens. Combat design and boss design in Dawntrail has accelerated to the point where it used to be like the trickiest thing that would happen is you would be told don't stand here by an area marker on the ground. And what we've been trained in Final Fantasy XIV is as long as you are not in the area where the marker is when it disappears, you won't get hit. The animation can hit you, but as long as you're not there when the marker disappears, you won't get hit. They eventually upgraded it to the marker that tells you not where to stand is going to appear there so quickly that there's no possible way for you to react to it. And the only way you can know not to stand there is to actually watch the boss and see what they're physically doing. And that makes for very dynamic, very interesting combat, because you can't just stare at your ability bar and make sure that you're pushing the button at the right time. You have to constantly be looking at, okay, why is he raising his left hand? And why does the thing say death to the left? Oh, that's because he's going to kill everything on the left. I should move to the right. Also, what's really, really annoying is if you are in front of the boss, so the boss is facing you, and it says something like, left arm smash. Your left is not the boss's left, because they are facing you, their left is your right, and it gets very confusing very quickly if you're a tank. So anyway, when we start getting to Dawntrail, they have gone hyper things. They have ones where they will show you the danger place at one point, and then you'll just have to remember that you can't go there. They will show you a sequence of danger places where each one will go in sequence, and you need to make sure that you're not standing in the bad place when it goes off like 5 seconds later, and there's no marking for it. You just have to remember where you were supposed to not stand. And the other thing that they do is they will have multiple things going on at the same time that all require you to understand where the bad things are. It's very dynamic, very interesting, and very difficult for MMO combat. And I don't think, like, I play Monster Hunter. I love Monster Hunter. I would never compare Monster Hunter to an MMO as far as combat is concerned, because Monster Hunter has nothing to do with don't stand in the red. While there are situations where bad things will be on the ground and you need to not stand in them, Monster Hunter, you have to know when to dodge and, when to dive in and what part of the thing to hit. Or you talk about something like Elden Ring, which I've been playing a lot. Elden Ring is very rarely a don't stand in the red. Elden Ring is watch the boss and make sure you block at the right time or dodge at the right time, dodge in the right direction, get to the right part of the boss at the right time. That's very, very complicated. In comparison, MMOs in general are going to be much more simplistic because you don't have a block button, you don't have a jump button that's going to do anything other than make your character go up, and has no mechanical benefit. But I do think the dungeons and the raids and things like that in Dawntrail are some of the most challenging content that they've made. Now, I got through every single one of them, and I didn't throw my controller across the floor ever. In fact, I think the worst I ever did was I died like 3 or 4 times to the same boss. That's it. When compared to something like Elden Ring, where you die 100 times to the same boss and you still have no idea what the hell you're doing. Very different situation. So, the final trial for the MSQ, the big bad guy is there. It's an epic fight. There are danger zones you have to stay away from. There are things that you have to destroy that if you don't destroy them, bad things happen. There are things where you have to ensure that you're running at the right time and not moving at the right time. It is a conglomeration of all the different mechanics that they have created, just put into this one glorious thing of chaos. And the other thing that's unique about it is up until that point, you can run every single dungeon and trial and everything in the game with computer allies. And the nice thing about it, they call it the trust system. The nice thing about doing that as a trust is the computer allies know where to stand every single time. They know every one of the boss mechanics. So I almost always run every dungeon as a trust first, because then I learn all the mechanics from literally just standing on top of whoever else is in my role. It works phenomenally well. This is the first trial. It's the only trial in the pre-endgame content that you can't use a trust for. You have to do it with actual living people. And we got through the whole thing without wiping. I think I died once in it. But because there were other people there, they could raise you and it was perfectly fine. At the end, and I mentioned this in my video yesterday, the thing that I don't like about World of Warcraft is World of Warcraft, you're a secondary character in Blizzard's story. And the real heroes are Thrall, are Malfurion, are Illidan. The named characters in World of Warcraft are the important ones. You're just also there. And the most obvious indication of that is every final boss of an expansion, you are not the person that beats it. One of the characters that Blizzard made always is the one that beats it. And you generally get to a point where you fought the entire battle, you've done really, really well, and then the boss does something that debilitates you to where you can't do anything anymore. And you have to be saved by someone else. Guess what happens in the final trial of Dawntrail? The big baddie. You have just spent probably like 5 to 10 minutes going crazy as all this nonsense is going on, and you're having to keep track of 3 different attacks that are all going off at different times, but you've been warned about them like 7 months ago, and you have to kind of remember and put like a reminder in your phone. Oh yeah, remember that this location is going to kill you in like a day or 2. So you're doing all this crazy stuff, and then all of you get knocked out. You are all paralyzed, or I can't remember what they do, but you are out of commission. You can do nothing as the big baddie charges up their final powerful attack. And what happens? Reality is broken, And I don't mean like my immersion was broken. I mean they actually break reality. There is a tear in the fabric of reality because you're currently in a different dimension from the rest of the existence. And from this tear in reality, Lamat comes and saves everyone. Lamat is the reason that you win. Had Lamat not come in and Deus Ex Machina'd this thing, everyone would be dead and the world would be over. Lamat is the hero. You are the side character. It is almost identical to what happened. Like, I remember the first time I did Ice Crown Citadel, which was the final raid in Wrath of the Lich King. Still my favorite World of Warcraft expansion. For anyone that doesn't know, I played World of Warcraft for like a decade. I loved it. I started in vanilla. I went all the way through Cataclysm. So I guess it wasn't a decade. Maybe it was like 5 or 6 years, something like that. Anyway, I played all the way through Cataclysm, and I got through the main story of Cataclysm, and then the patches and stuff like that, I just stopped playing, and I didn't start playing again until Legion. Wrath of the Lich King, by far one of the best, if not the best expansions. The final boss of Wrath of the Lich King is the Lich King. The Lich King, who was introduced in Warcraft 3. The Frozen Throne expansion was entirely about him. He has been the big baddie that has been causing so much trouble for so long. The entire of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, depending on where you start, you are threatened by Arthas multiple times throughout the leveling process, their MSQ. You finally fight your way up this giant tower of ice, beating undead dragons and having an entire airship battle with the other faction, and then fighting your own allies. And it's this really epic, amazing thing. Finally get to the top. There's Arthas the Lich King. You are there with, 25 was the big raid size then. You were there with 24 of your closest friends, and you are doing just nonsense stuff to kill him. And you finally see his hit points get down to the single digits, and it's getting really close. Like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And suddenly Arthas goes, enough. And he does this thing, and this wave of ice blasts out, and you are all frozen solid. And you get to watch as the person that you've probably just spent weeks fighting your way to get to, and then have probably spent at least hours getting your ass handed to you over and over again because it was the most difficult content at that time. You get to watch as he wins. He's like, you have done such an amazing job for me, and now you will become my perfect weapons. And then Tyrion Fordring, I think that's who it was, some paladin who's important in the lore, but hasn't done a damn thing this entire raid, shows up with the Holy Sword, effectively WoW's version of Excalibur, and he kicks the shit out of Arthas the Lich King. And then the final cutscene plays, where you get to hear Arthas' father go, all kings' reigns must end eventually, my son. And then Arthas dies. The culmination of a story plot that started in Warcraft 3, probably close to a decade before, you get to the final fight of one of the most beloved characters and one of the best written villains I've ever done, and you get to sit on your ass and watch someone else kill them. Now, to Square Enix's credit, Lamat doesn't strike the final blow. However, Lamat is able to stop the final attack and basically irreparably change the final boss that you're dealing with so that you can strike the final blow. So, if I remember correctly, again, I only did this trial once. so I may be misremembering everything. If I remember correctly, Lamat does not strike the final blow. Lamat sets up the final blow. And you do get to actually kill the boss. But cutscene plays, and it's Lamat that is front and center. Lamat has a heart-to-heart with the final boss. Lamat is the one that is celebrated as the person that beat the final boss, not you. Again, this is DM PCing at its finest. Let the players do most of the work, but the most important part, the part where change actually occurs, take away all player agency and then send your DMPC in to save the day. And they didn't come up with an explanation for why Lamat just showed up at that point. They just randomly show up and are exactly when you need. If you're unfamiliar, I call it a Deus Ex Machina. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it actually comes from Greek theater. If anyone is unaware, if you ever take the first time I went to college, I actually studied theater. My degree was theater with an emphasis in acting. And I minored in music with an emphasis in vocal performance. So I basically created my own musical theater major. I dropped out before I finished that degree, by the way. But one of the things that you learn when you are studying theater is you learn the history of theater, and you learn where all of the tropes and all of the ideas that we use in modern theater, a lot of it originated in Greek theater. Greek theater was phenomenally amazing. Antigone and Oedipus Rex, I mean, these are phenomenally amazing shows that were written hundreds of years ago. And there's a term in when referring to Greek theater called Deus Ex Machina. I don't believe it originated in Greek theater because it's Latin and the Greeks spoke Greek, not Latin. But Deus Ex Machina is Latin, and the term means God from machine. And basically what it was in Greek theater, a lot of times when the world would get just screwed up beyond recognition, a god would come down and would fix everything. And they would have to, in the theater, would have to lower them on some sort of machine. Very similar to what we do in modern theater now. We call it flying in. And there's a lot of different, you can fly in sets, you can fly in people, but it basically means that they're attached to some sort of rigging, and they're designed to descend from the ceiling or descend from somewhere above. So Deus Ex Machina is a term that means that you get to a point in the story that is so convoluted that there's no way to fix it, and so suddenly the gods who can change reality just show up on a machine. They come out of nowhere and they fix your problem for you. That's what Deus Ex Machina is. And it's generally used in a derogatory form when we're talking about modern theater, because it's considered a really bad trope to use. Because it's basically, you have written yourself into a corner that's impossible to get out of. And instead of trying to rewrite it so that, the story can make sense, you just go, and then an angel appears and grants everybody one wish, and everybody agrees that the wish is that no one is hurt anymore, and the story is resolved. The end. And it's this very anticlimactic, very unsatisfying end, because the thing that makes theater and storytelling in general compelling is the idea of creating tension, creating conflict, and then resolving that conflict. That is all of storytelling throughout all of history, is the idea of creating tension and then releasing that tension. Music is built on the idea of creating tension that in the music world we call dissonance, and then resolving that tension into something that feels good, and we call that harmony. So it goes dissonance to harmony. You create dissonance and then go to resolve it to harmony over and over and over again. And that's how you write a song. And that's how you write a story. You introduce characters, you create conflict, and then you resolve the conflict. And that's what makes storytelling so desirable and so much so entertaining is watching conflict, something that doesn't feel good, get resolved into something that does feel good. Dissonance is uncomfortable. Harmony is very comfortable, very calming. So, but if all you ever hear is harmony, it gets boring very, very quickly. The resolution of uncomfortable to comfortable, unpleasant to pleasant, is what makes things interesting. It's what makes entertainment entertainment. And Deus Ex Machina, you get all of this conflict, you get all of these things, and then it's not really resolved. It just stops existing. You don't get the resolution. It doesn't resolve. It just stops existing. And that's not fulfilling. That's not fun. And that's what happened at the end of the MSQ. So if you have nothing else to kind of support my idea of DMPC, that is the blatant, obvious fact that supports the idea that you are not the main character, because in the final battle, when all the cards are down, you lose. 100%. You are taken out of the fight. And Wook Lamat is the one that finishes the fight, and then in the final cutscene of that fight, Wook Lamat is the one that resolves everything. Nothing you do in the final fight matters, because Wook Lamat is the one that actually fixes everything. And there's nothing to say, just again, without getting into spoilers, the way that they resolve everything, nothing about us beating the snot out of this this thing. I don't want to get into too many details. Nothing about us beating the snot out of this final boss is referenced as, well, that was the reason that Wook Lamat was able to come in and fix everything. It's not. It's entirely about the relationship that Wook Lamat has with this final boss creature, and entirely based on Wook Lamat's persuasive abilities. That's it. They never go, oh, you know, I never could have done this if you hadn't weakened them first. Nope. So this entire expansion, you are a side character. You're not a mentor because you don't provide any sort of correction. You don't really provide much advice at all. And you are never really referred to as a mentor. You are never treated as a mentor. You're never treated as a coach. You're just treated as a member of the team and eventually a friend. And that's not to say you can't be friends with your mentors. You can't be friends with your coach. However, simply being a friend to someone does not make them your mentor or coach. And again, as a society, we have really kind of convoluted this idea of what an actual mentor is. And I think a lot of it has to do with how mentors are kind of treated in the media and in our entertainment in general. They've kind of elevated them to this high, lofty, almost kind of angelic thing where this was my mentor and they inspired me. But they never really show them actually doing the work, actually teaching these people. And a lot of these people that claim, well, this person was my mentor, their mentor didn't do anything for them other than give them something to aspire to. That's not a mentor, that's an inspiration. And a lot of people confuse the terms. They think that a mentor needs to inspire you. They don't. A mentor needs to train you. An inspiration needs to inspire you. It's kind of in the word. But a mentor is there to mentor you, is to teach you how to do something. And part of the teaching and training process is correction, and that never happens. Or the very few times it happens, the person that corrects Wook Lamat is generally Wook Lamat or one of their family members. I don't think I ever remember, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I don't ever remember the Warrior of Light correcting them or teaching them everything or anything like that. When Wook Lamat did something wrong, in general, the Warrior of Light either chastised them which is not correcting. Chastising, saying, well, you did something wrong, that is not correction, that is punishment. It can be a part of correction, acknowledging that something was done incorrectly, but the aspect of correction is, okay, you did this wrong, what was the right way to do it? Or how can we ensure that you don't do it wrong again? That's what correction is making something correct, not acknowledging that something was wrong. Correction requires you to correct it. And the Warrior of Light never does that. You're never given that option. Most of the options you are given when Lamat does things that are not good are, hey, don't feel bad, it was a mistake anyone could have made, or, yeah, you fucked up. Nowhere in there is, yes, you did this wrong, now this is a way that you could have prevented that. Or, yes, you did this wrong, now let's come up with a way that it's not going to happen again. That's never a conversation that happens. It's always, well, it happened, it's over, let's hope it doesn't happen again. One of the things I learned very early on in my management career, hope is not a business plan. This was a mantra of one of my first district managers, who I gained more and more respect for the guy the further away from the job I have, because when I was working it, he was my boss's boss, and so we feared him. But he did personally teach me how to run a store. Because the store manager at the time, I was not the store manager, I was a lowly entry-level manager, but the store manager at the time was a dipshit and refused to do his job, and firing him would have been a pain in the ass and would have cost them a lot of money because he was under contract. And so instead of doing that, the district manager, my boss's boss, came in and he sat me down for about half an hour and brought out P&L reports, and he showed me how to look at inventory numbers, and he showed me how to gauge sales records and things like that. And he taught me how to run a store one-on-one. And then he followed up fairly regularly going, hey, Jody, what are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? He was a mentor to me because he took the time to teach me how to do it. And one of the first things he taught me is hope is not a business plan. What that means is when something goes wrong, the correct response is never, well, it happened, it's over, I hope it doesn't happen again. Hope is not a business plan. What you need to do is something bad goes wrong. Yes, it's over, it's done with. You can't dwell in the past. But you have to be able to go, okay, this is why it went wrong, and these are the steps that we're taking to make sure it doesn't happen again. Are those steps always going to work? Absolutely not. You will quite often have the same problem happen over and over again. And the key difference between a bad manager and good managers, each time the same thing happens, the same problem occurs, it occurs for a different reason when you're a good manager. When you're a bad manager, the same problem happens the same way for this because of the same cause, because you never fix the underlying issue that caused the problem. There's a lot of problems that can be caused by a lot of different things. So yeah, I hope those of you that are tuning in for this kind of understand where I'm going for. I've had a couple people ask me what are my opinions on now that I've actually finished it. I may do another entire vlog that's going to be much heavier in the spoilers, because there's a lot about Dawntrail that excites me. There's a lot of plot threads that they've introduced that I will guarantee some of them were introduced intentionally to basically guide the next few expansions. For me, it's kind of blatantly obvious the direction that they want to take the story for Final Fantasy XIV, based on the plot threads that they introduced and then seemingly just didn't care about. To me, it seems kind of blatantly obvious that they're trying to relatively poorly foreshadow that this is where we're going to go. And there's also a few other side plots that I think they had so much going on they just forgot they wrote them, that I think could turn into some very, very interesting things. So I think I'm probably going to make a vlog talking about that. It's going to be very, very spoiler heavy because you have to kind of talk about them. But as far as this one, like I said, the main purpose of this is really to focus on that idea that the Warrior of Light was somehow a mentor or a coach. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was because, again, back when I could work, before I became disabled, that's what I did. We called it a lot of different things. I was a training manager. I was a sales manager at one point. I was in charge of team development. That's a really, really common term for trainers in kind of corporate America now. Is, someone that's in charge of team development or something akin to development. Human resource development is another one that's sometimes thrown in there. Training is just not a word that they like to use too often because it has a pretty bad connotation based on really, really bad training experiences that they've done. But so I'm very, very knowledgeable about what mentorship is, what training is, what coaching is, and what people think it is, and what they're using to try and explain why the Warrior of Light is not a side character is just wrong. That's not mentorship. At best, you are filling a kind of a wise old man position. If you're unfamiliar with the term, the wise old man is a character archetype that's been kind of identified in storytelling in general. If you ever read, I can't remember the dude. I hated the book. The book's called The Power of Myth, I think. It was a book I read in high school, and I absolutely despised it because my Power of Myth, is that what it is? Yeah, Joseph Campbell. That's what it is. Power of Myth is a book by this dude, this dude named Joseph Campbell, written by this dude named Joseph Campbell, and it basically talks about the idea of storytelling is what it is, and it identifies a bunch of different archetypes. And one of the biggest takeaways that anyone that has read it comes away with is the idea of the hero's journey, which is an extremely, extremely common plot design that is used constantly in literally everything you've ever watched. You can find a way to fit the hero's journey into it. Star Wars is the hero's journey, and all the different archetypes fit into there. The old wise man is Ben Kenobi. The hero is Luke Skywalker. Like, these are archetypes. At best, you could argue that the Warrior of Light is trying to fill the old wise man position, the old wise man archetype, and they do it remarkably poorly. Because even if you look at Ben Kenobi as the old wise man, Ben Kenobi didn't just sit there and wait for Luke to ask him things. He actively informed Luke literally every step of the way. Mos Eisley, a hive of scum and villainy. No, a Jedi feels the Force flowing through them. You mean it controls my movements? In a way, but it also bends to your will. Now, try this. He was constantly correcting Luke over and over and over again. So even from that aspect, again, there was no correction from the Warrior of Light. They're not a mentor. They're not a coach. They're kind of a trusted wise friend that is not involved in most of the big decisions. Most of the big decisions are made by Lamat. Sometimes she will ask her advice, but due to the nature of how MMOs work, there's no advice you can give that's going to change the decision that she makes, because this is not a branching storyline type of adventure. This is a very linear story. So yeah, I hope anyone that has watched this for the over an hour that I've been talking about it, I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. Like I said, it's not that I think Dawntrail is a bad expansion. I don't think the writing was done particularly well. And the writing is learning lessons from World of Warcraft that it needs to not learn. Because World of Warcraft is not written very well. It would be amazing as a story, but as an interactive entertainment experience, it falls flat. And I really don't want to see Final Fantasy XIV fall into those same traps of the NPCs are more important than the player character. That's the thing that has made Final Fantasy XIV as enjoyable as it has been for the past 10 years, has been that your character is the most important person in the world, and that you really can't say that for any other MMO I've ever played aside from maybe Star Wars The Old Republic. Everywhere else, you are an adventurer. In in Final Fantasy XIV, you are the adventurer. You are the warrior of light. And every time, it was one of my favorite things about Shadowbringers, was they actually explain how trials and everything works. Whenever you are getting other warriors of light to help you, you are literally taking warriors of light from other reflections and bringing them in to help you. And now, every single time you have a big trial where you have to bring in other people, you will watch him bring out, what was his name? Was it Ansem? You bring out the memory stone of Anson, and then you watch as all these portals open, and you literally draw in people from other reflections that are basically reflections of you to be able to all fight together. And I love that explanation. It's not that there's lots of different warriors of light all traveling around at the same time. No, it's all the other player characters are reflections of you from alternate realities. I love that explanation. It's such a phenomenal explanation. And it makes it feel like you're still special despite the fact that millions of people play this game. Because they basically just say, well, all those other people are reflections of you that made different choices in a different reality. That's awesome. That's amazing writing. And then we get to this, and it's like, well, even though there are millions of different versions of you, they all had to be saved by Lamat. Because Lamat was the most important character in Dawntrail. Dawntrail is the story of Lamat that you happened to experience. But it's not the story of the Warrior of Light. Warrior of Light is not a mentor. They're not a coach. They are a member of Lamat's team. And that's it. And to me, that's not okay. I like being the main character in this story. Mostly because while I am the main character in my story fucking sucks. I hate my story. And the bad guys win constantly in my story. And there's so many things I can't do in my story. When I play this game, I want to be the main character that actually gets everything that they want and can do anything that they want. That's fun for me. So, anyway, I hope you guys find this interesting. If you are interested about this topic, again, my daily vlog, for anyone that doesn't know, my daily vlog is not meant to be this high quality piece of YouTube entertainment. I do this because due to my disability, I can't leave the basement I live in, and there are no windows in my basement. I have and I also have effectively time blindness. I can't feel time passing. And so without having a job and without having things to do, I can get kind of lost. And so the main purpose of the daily vlog is to give me some structure and to give me the chance to talk to someone, because I live with my brother, but he and I don't talk because he also has his own set of disabilities he has to deal with. And because of my social anxiety disorder, I just have a hard time talking to people in real life, even someone blood related to me. So I don't talk to anyone. So that's kind of the purpose of the daily vlog. It's not supposed to be entertaining. It's a tool for me to kind of grow and is part of my therapy and things like that. That being said, I do want it to be entertaining. It's just that's not the purpose. So if you guys are interested in more kind of Final Fantasy XIV content, again, I've been playing, I started playing Final Fantasy XIV at the very, very end of A Realm Reborn. Like, I was finishing the MSQ for A Realm Reborn when Heaven's Word launched. But I have been playing since A Realm Reborn. I love it. It is one of my favorite games I've ever played. I have hundreds of hours in it, maybe thousands at this point. I don't know. I've been playing for a long time. So if that's something that you guys would be interested in, I do like to make these as entertaining as possible, and I like to talk about things that I find interesting, and that's one of the things I find interesting. So if you guys would like me to talk a little bit more often about Final Fantasy XIV, I'd love to do that. This channel tends to be very, very focused on tabletop RPGs because that's where most of my fans came from. So even talking about Final Fantasy XIV, like I did in my last video, I'm going to find ways to bring in tabletop RPGs, and I'm also probably going to find ways to bring in business and business management because that was a very, very large portion of my life before I became disabled. So yeah, if that's something you guys are interested in, let me know in the comments. I'll make more videos about it. Like I said, I truly do love it. I think the storytelling up until this point has been amazing. And it's just the MSQ that I don't like. And it's not that it's bad, it's unfulfilling. It was still fun to play. I just didn't feel invested in it, and it felt like a real letdown compared to every other MSQ that I've played. But it was still fun. They had some awesome scenes, though I wish they would have had more of them, where, like, the Scions of the, what is it, Seventh Dawn or whatever it is? All of your friends come back and do badass shit. When they showed where exactly what Estinian was doing over here, that was massively cool. I loved being able to travel around with, like, Wook Lamat. I don't hate the character. I actually like Wook Lamat. And other than some questionable voice lines, I think, to be blunt, I think Wook Lamat was actually voiced better than a lot of the other characters in this. Somebody mentioned Thancred specifically. I kid you not, I had to stop playing the game and look to see if they changed Thancred's voice actor like 3 or 4 times while playing the expansion, because Thancred barely shows up in this expansion. Slight spoiler alert. Barely shows up. And the few times he does, he sounds like his British accent that he's been using for forever sounds horrible. It's such a bad British accent that I had to check to see if they changed the voice actor. They didn't. It's the same dude that's been playing Thancred since Heaven's Word. But for whatever reason, I don't know if they recorded this remotely, and because of that, they weren't the voice director was not able to give kind of the live feedback that would normally be a part of the voice recording process. I don't know if they were just kind of phoning it in because they were doing something else. I don't know what it was, but Thancred and Urianger in particular just sounded really, really bad. Like, not like bad vocal quality, though they were not recorded in the quality of the recordings was not fantastic. But they just, like, from an acting perspective, the acting choices they made no sense. And then the voices that they used, they're American actors that play these roles that put on British accents, which is not a particularly difficult thing to do. I used to have like half a dozen different British accents that I could do, drop of a hat. One of my favourite ones was I had this weird kind of Scottish accent that was kind of a blend of like Ewan McGregor and a few other people, and I used to do this when I delivered pizzas, and I was actually fairly good at it. Fun fact, you actually don't have to have a really convincing Scottish accent to fool people in Wisconsin into believing that you're from Scotland, because they've never heard a bloody Scottish accent. That being said, my father was British. My father was English. He was born in Salford, which is just barely south of Manchester, and he spoke with a Mancunian accent. Sounds a lot like this. When he actually did have an accent, he was a polyglot, so he spoke like half a dozen languages, and his accent changed with the wind. So I understand. I used to study accents and languages and things like that when I was an actor. That was my specialty, was doing various accents. these were the worst British accents I've ever heard. This was like really bad Shakespeare in the Park. Dost thou bite thee tongue? Bite your... Oh, man, I can't even remember the line. Basic Shakespeare, folks. Dost thou bite your thumb at me, sir? Anyone has no idea what that's referencing. That's Romeo and Juliet. I've never actually done Shakespeare. I had a chance to do it, and unfortunately, that was when I was first diagnosed with depression. They put me on these meds that screwed me up massively. Almost caused me to fail out of college. There's the one chance I've had to do Shakespeare, and it's one of my biggest regrets that I never got to do Shakespeare. But yeah, I mean, just Tancred in particular sounded like a bad Shakespearean accent. It was, I don't know why, because the actor playing him is phenomenally good and has done so many good things. But anyway, I've talked enough about this. Thank you to anyone that made it to the end of this. I hope this explains a little bit better why I still firmly believe that the MSQ writers took cues from World of Warcraft and really every other MMO in existence to basically make you a minor character in their story, and why I hope that this was just a misstep that they correct very quickly. Otherwise, it's going to be all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right, bye-bye.